got some guests in the audience, which if they've got a burning question they signal to me they'd like to ask or clarification, please do that. Signal to me, councillors' questions. I'll hand over now to Cam to start the process of the workshop. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you, and good morning. My name is Cameron Smith, and I am the Senior Strategy Manager at Environment Canterbury, and I am guiding this Zone Committee review on behalf of the Canterbury Mural Forum. I also know we've got someone from Environment Canterbury online. Chair Pauling is hoping to join online, but I know he's council business, so we might see him appear online as well. So today I'm here to talk about the Zone Committee review, and you'll see I'm from Environment Canterbury, but this is very purposefully done here on behalf of the Canterbury Mural Forum. Canterbury Mural Forum asked for this review and have been guiding and shaping this review, and so it very much reflects the most recent kind of decisions and endorsements of the Canterbury Mural Forum, so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So I'm going to talk to you covering a little bit of context with regard to the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, which I'm sure you'll know, review outcomes and where the Canterbury Mural Forum got to in November of last year, and then I'll talk to the current work program that we've got around refining the proposed local leadership group model, and hopefully you've got the slide pack in front of you and you had time to look through that, and also cover the next steps to July 2025. Now I have a number of slides here. I will rattle through them because while it's important you kind of hear from me, it's even more important that we hear from you. So I really want to leave enough time for a good conversation around this at the end. So I just want to set the scene with a bit of kind of context around what the Canterbury Water Management Strategy is, and I'm sure a lot of you know this. But this emerged as a response to severe droughts and no operative freshwater planning framework back in the 2000s, and some strategic water studies that were supported both by government and local government here in Canterbury. And in 2009, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy was adopted by the Canterbury Mural Forum. And the key partners to this were territorial authorities, obviously, including yourselves, Ngāi Tahu, Environment Canterbury, and community organisations with interests in water. So we often refer to it as the Blue Book, and that's what we see there on this slide, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. Now, underpinning the Canterbury Water Management Strategy are several key principles, including collaboration, consensus, subsidiarity, local decision making, and representativeness. And so they still sit there and remain and continue to guide the CWMS and implementation of that. Now, of course, as part of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, a number of water zones were also established, and so across Canterbury we've got 10 water zones that you can see there on the screen, and each of those zones at the beginning of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy had zone committees, so 10 zone committees and regional committee were in place in 2010 and 2011 to continue that collaborative approach for the CWMS. Now each of those zone committees is a joint committee of the relevant territorial authority and Environment Canterbury. Obviously around here it's the Ashburton Zone Committee, and each zone committee includes elected members from each council, including the regional council, Runanga appointees, and 4 to 7 community members and some youth representatives. So these groups are facilitated by Environment Canterbury to enhance delivery capability. So we have a team of facilitators that sits with Environment Canterbury, but already serves the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. And as kind of a bit of background with regard to kind of honoraria is paid to Runanga appointees and community members. Environment Canterbury and Ashburton District Council split those honoraria, so it's around about $20,000 or $22,000 per annum for Ashburton District Council, and the territorial authority supplied secretariat support for meetings, etc. And so as part of these zone committees, they've engaged communities to develop solutions to local water issues, and so some of the key products, or one of the key products that I'm sure you know about, is the Zone Implementation Programs, or otherwise known as ZIPs. And the body that these committees undertook a significant amount of work in the 2010s in identifying local water issues, and a range of actions to support overcoming some of those challenges, and also supporting the sub-regional RMA planning process that was led out of Environment Canterbury but directly formed by each of the zone committees across Canterbury. And so that was what we see as the first kind of strategic first half of what these zone committees did. And so they were very successful in that space, and there was a lot of public interest in the work of the zone committees, and they did an awful lot of really challenging work, and lots of debates and consensus building around tables across Canterbury. However, over the second half and more over the last 5 years, they've shifted from that plan development through to implementation, and with that has created a number of kind of challenges that we'll get to, but part of which is why there's been a decision to review zone committees. And so, because of that evolving freshwater management, it led to concerns for effectiveness and relevance of some committees. And where I talk about evolving freshwater management policies there, I think it's really key to talk about what we're seeing come out of Wellington, out of national government, and various national policy statements, and the way in which they've changed some of the conversation with community around freshwater outcomes that need to be sought. But also things such as Three Waters or Local Water Done Well have also taken up a lot of oxygen, essentially, around water management, particularly within our communities, focused on what's happening out of Wellington rather than focused on what we want to achieve from a Canterbury perspective. And so in late 2023, the Mural Forum agreed to a review of the zone committee approach, and saw it as an opportunity to assess structure, function, and the resourcing needed to support community leadership. So, as I've mentioned previously, Environment Canterbury is kind of resourcing this review, but it's really done through the Mural Forum, has been shaped by a kind of a working group of Canterbury mayors, Orunanga chairs, and Environment Canterbury councillors, towards particularly over the second half of last year, and working group is continuing on with a couple of meetings over the next 2 months. 2024 was largely about engaging with zone committees, engaging with mana whenua, engaging with mayors to understand what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and starting to shape up where to go next, and that's where we're at now. So the first stage of the review was completed was seen as completed with the November 2024 briefing to the Mural Forum, and that report is available online. And within that meeting in November, the Mural Forum endorsed a number of things. First, and kind of importantly, that zone committees were no longer the preferred approach in some areas, but noting that others work well. And this is a key point, because if you go talk to Mayor Mackel up in Kaikoura, he will say, please leave our zone committee alone, it works very well and we want to see it continue. Or if you go elsewhere, down south, they will say, well, we've got catchment groups now that are supplanting the need for zone committees, and so something needs to change. What the Mural Forum endorsed, though, is that local leadership, particularly within councils and mana whenua, is still important, and so they endorsed like a base model that locally connects councils and mana whenua at the leadership level, and that's what we're here to talk about today. The Mural group, the Mural Orunanga working group, also really identified that the CWS fundamentals, guiding plans, and the vision within the CWS remain very relevant, critical, and sound. What they also did was identify that further work was needed to refine the space model, supported by that working group, and agreed that a final report would come back to the Mural Forum in May 2025, and so that's what we're working up to at the moment. We've been updating zone committees and staff at territorial authorities on the outcomes and next steps. But what we're doing at the moment is engaging with each and every territorial authority across Canterbury over March and April. Year number 3 on that list. We've already talked to Selwyn and Waimati last week, Ashburton this week. We're down to Fairlie next week to talk to Mackenzie, and continuing it to roll out. And we're also talking to each and every Orunanga as well as part of that. So now I just want to spend a bit of time on, oh, excuse me, spend a little bit of time on this proposed base model. And I know you'll have a few questions around this, so I just want to kind of labour a few points here. And so essentially this is this is a tricky bit of work because we have differing views across Canterbury around what these groups should look like and what the connection to community should look like. And so one of the core principles behind this is, well, these local leadership groups are best placed to determine what the community connection should look like. But across the region, the Mural Forum endorsed that the one area of consistency will be that these local leadership groups should include territorial authorities, mana whenua and regional council at the leadership level. And we've also begun talking around what the function of these groups should be with the Mural Forum, and I'm going to talk about purpose soon as well. But the Mural Forum talked about priority setting, identifying what are those key issues at place that need to be, those key freshwater issues at place that need to be taken on and addressed, and then supporting oversight of action within those three groupings. But then also importantly connecting with the community, understanding what community-driven action is occurring, understanding if there's opportunities for councils to support that work, and to align kind of council work programs with that if there's an opportunity to do so. So again, just to really hone in on purpose here, we're starting talking about prioritising, aligning and recommending, and I'll go into these a little bit detail, but also connection. And so this diagram we've got here is our best efforts to demonstrate this is what your local leadership group might look like. And it will have, soft connections or hard connections into these groups depending on what they would like to see at place. And so obviously, there's a question around what the connection into central government agencies. We know DOC or LINZ have a big role to play in some areas, especially if you look down south, or if you look up to Ashburton Lakes, if you think about LINZ and DOC. But also key interest groups, key local community, etc. And so there's a real opportunity to kind of present local leadership and tie into some of those groups to see if we can advance the interests of our districts. And so when we talk about prioritise, we're thinking here around there's numerous water management challenges that need to be addressed and resources are limited. I think if we look back to the zone implementation plans that have been created by each of the zone committees, sometimes there'll be up to 100 actions that have been kind of identified as needed to advance freshwater and ecosystem health. However, that's not very good for shaping work programs or helping to direct resource when we've got so many of them. So how can we do fewer things well? And this is around how can we prioritise action within place. Also, we've got a second one around align there. And so this is, how do we kind of align actions consistent with existing frameworks, whether it be the CWMS targets, zone implementation plans or existing zone committee action plans, and ensure alignment with efforts of community-driven action or action-driven elsewhere. And so this isn't about kind of attempting to own or attempting to govern action undertaken elsewhere. It's an attempt to align the work of councils with lots of the great community-driven action that's occurring elsewhere. And then the last one here is around recommend, and so that is to provide strategic guidance and recommendations back into council. So you might know that zone committees are joint committees, but they have no decision-making function. They provide recommendations back into councils, and we're seeing much the same role here. This isn't about taking decision-making away from councils. It's just about helping coordinate, identify, prioritise, and make recommendations back into councils about what are some of the key challenges that need to be addressed through particular actions. I'll just quickly talk about the local community connection as well, because I think this diagram doesn't give it justice, and it's often the question that comes up, because as you'll know, zone committees include community representatives on each zone committee. we've heard differing views across Canterbury about whether or not that should continue. What we want to do is provide that flexibility, so local leadership groups, so if there's a local leadership group for Ashburton, it can determine what that community connection looks like. Should it be ongoing community representatives around the table, much like a zone committee, or should it be regular kind of forums held with the community, or should it be something else? That's the decision that's best made by these local leadership groups based on the needs of that community, and so that's how we're hoping to see it. It's not a decision that should be made from Chewham Street. And so I just wanted to kind of labour that point because we do get asked on it quite often. So that's all very well. It looks nice on a slide. However, there's a few key questions that we need to work through, and that the Mural Forum's asked us to work through with this working group of mayors and Urunanga chairs. First of all, there's a scale question here. Should groups operate to existing CWMS zones, so you'll remember we have 10 zones across Canterbury, or are there other options such as district boundaries, proposed freshwater management units or other areas? And so we're looking at options for that at the moment. Existing CWMS zones, when they were created back in around 2010, there was a hell of a lot of effort put into understanding what works best, and so we're looking at that and see if there are any other options would serve the community better than that. The next one is around scope, and obviously we're using the CWMS as a base model, and that's very much focused on freshwater management and some biodiversity outcomes. But questions have been raised, should it expand to also include some biosecurity work? That's something we're considering, but at the moment our advice is probably keep it tight and prove value, and then if that value, if we see that value, we can open up a question about increasing scope over time. The third one here is around mandate and structure. So obviously zone committees are joint committees between the regional council and territorial authorities. Should these new groups, if they're endorsed, should they remain joint committees or should they be something else? So we have a number of other examples to look at across Canterbury and nationally, but we also have collaborative partnerships, co-governance arrangements. We have, if we look to Whakaropo Whakaora, which is Littleton Harbour, we have one around Waihora, Lake Ellesmere, and we also have one around Mokahi and Mackenzie. And so we're learning from those as we go, and what are the strengths and weaknesses associated with those if we do want to change from a joint committee approach. However, the joint committee approach does bring a level of formality that's hard to replace through some of those other approaches. And lastly we are looking at different options for operations. So how should these groups set wider community membership, if that's what they choose to do, meeting frequency, etc. And so those will be some options that are best determined by each of these groups, but we want to kind of outlay what are the pros and cons of some of those options. So those are the questions we're working through, and this one here, the slide here, is the process in which we're doing that. So we've got 2 more workshops with working group of mayors, Urunanga representatives and Environment Canterbury chair. Now just a bit more detail behind that working group. So we met twice at the end of last year, and this is really the group that's kind of shaping up the work. And there were about 5 or 6 mayors on that group, and 2 to 4 Urunanga representatives and the Environment Canterbury chair. And so they've been meeting to provide guidance to the work of staff, and so it really has been a collaborative effort within that working group, which was determined by the Mural Forum and by Urunanga chairs. We're also having discussions, obviously, with each and every territorial authority, council and Papatapu Urunanga, and so that's why we're kind of busy on the road having face-to-face meetings with the likes of you over the next 4 weeks. We're also engaging at the staff level across councils via the Canterbury Policy Forum, and the Canterbury Policy Forum reports up to the Chief Executives Forum, which reports up to the Canterbury Mural Forum. And then, of course, our zone committees continue to work in their current form until decisions are made in June. And there's a common, we often hear that this is taking time, and we know that it's taking time, and it does create a level of uncertainty with the community that concerns us as well. However, it's worth getting this decision right. and just given the nature of these zone committees and the need to talk to every territorial authority and regional council and mana whenua, it does take a bit of time. However, zone committees still have a number of work items that they've worked through or largely worked through, including finalising their action plan budget allocation. So each zone committee has $50,000 to spend over the course of the year towards projects in their area that deliver against their action plan. There's also a 2025 CWS Targets Progress Report being delivered this year, and so there's an opportunity for zone committees to inform that. That Targets Progress Report, which is also being delivered out of my area, will show that a significant amount of work has been undertaken across Canterbury towards those targets. However, it will also show that significant ongoing commitment is needed to deliver against those targets, because we're not there yet. However, there's a real opportunity to see how these local leadership groups can continue to support progress towards those targets. And then there's also an opportunity for zone committee groups to advise on local priorities that proposed local leaderships could focus on. So what do they think are the 2, 3, 4 key issues within the area that local leadership could help support? So this just articulates the timeline, and I really want to talk through the last 2 rows here, and particularly the May 2025. So after we've used March and early April to talk to each territorial authority and each runanga, we'll be providing advice, formulating advice and providing advice back to the Chief Executives Forum and the Canterbury Mayoral Forum on these proposed new local leadership groups. And so then we're hoping the Mayoral Forum will endorse where we land or otherwise. And then we'll be doing another round coming out to Ashburton District Council and each of the other 9 territorial authorities, because a decision is required as they are joint committees around zone committees, the decision to disestablish or not, and establish these new groups or not. And so I will be coming and talking to you again on this issue at that point. And then if it is agreed to set up these new groups, we'll be able to progress implementation of those. Now, there's a couple of big things. Obviously, October 2025 is a big month that I'm sure you all know about, so local body elections. So we're thinking about how we can get agreement to set these up, but then use the second half of this year to actually work through, okay, so let's get a sense of what community engagement or community connection might look like across Canterbury for each of these groups. Understand looking at all the existing documentation, such as zone implementation plans, etc. What are some of the key priorities that these new groups might want to focus on, so that when these new committees are established with new members, or these new local leadership groups are established with new members, they're rearing to go with a good body of kind of information in front of them. Now, that is me. I'm sorry I have kind of rattled through it, but somewhat purposefully to enable enough time to have a conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. That's really good. A good overview of the whole system. One thing that the Mayoral Forum also said is one size doesn't fit all. They mentioned that as well at our Mayoral Forum. So there's lots of things in there, and we can go to questions, councillors. And I've just been going back to the leading document, which is the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, which was adopted in 2009. It's now 16 years old. Have we refreshed that? I think I know the answer. Over the last 16 years. I don't think it has been.
No, it hasn't. There's been refreshing of the goals and targets, but not of the strategy itself. But you're quite right. I think that's the next. It hasn't been asked for by the Mayoral Forum. But I think that question will continue to be raised at some point. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got pieces out of the water management, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and implementation programs will be developed for each zone, and then the programs will address matters such as environmental restoration development, land use intensification reduction, land use practices, water brokerage and efficiency improvement, water quality and quantity. I think we're not doing some of that stuff that's in there. We've steered off. So it's good to have a review now and bring it back to where it wanted to be or refresh the CWMS strategy. And there's also been changes for the MPS, fresh water, which has changed direction. Has that filtered down to zone committee? I don't think so. It seems to be somewhere stuck at the Churum Street for the changes government signalling. It takes a while to move through. Should our zone committee be part of that? I probably should, because what government's signalling and what we're getting on the ground here in Mid-Canterbury, I think is what Mid-Canterbury wants, but there's a barrier in between at this stage. So zone committee perhaps needs to signal to Churum Street what Mid-Canterbury wants and revert back to one size doesn't fit all. We want to work on what Mid-Canterbury wants, Ashburton District. We need to identify the purpose. What do we want the zone committee to do? What tasks do we want them to achieve? At the moment, I don't believe there is a purpose. The committee hasn't given them something to do. And I think that's the number one thing we need to do first, is look at the purpose. What do we want them to do? And then with the diagram up there on the circle as to who's inside it, once we decide what we want to do, then we can decide who we want to do it. Get the what, then we can go to the who, in my view. I've got one light on, and I'm sure there'll be some good discussion. Lynette.
Yeah, what concerns me is your big circle here. It's been driven. No, I think we need to do a major big overhaul and relook at the whole thing. I'll start off like we've done our biodiversity strategy, and I don't want that upset, and it should work along with this and keep it within our boundary. We're all in this together, and we've got our catchment groups. They all need to be involved with this, but this is seemed to be driven by like the mayoral forum or the territorial authorities and regional council, and here you're talking about land use change and stuff. Well, that's affecting your farmers, and we haven't got farmers in here in this equation, because you're looking at farming types, and that you need, to me, you kind of need to work like our biodiversity group. We've got all stakeholders. We have the Fonterras and the Sinlays there. It's a big collaborative group, and this needs to perhaps reform and be a bit more of a collaborative group, and then you'll get things done, and you'll know the feelings of some of the stakeholders coming in here, and they will work with you. But when you sit here and you're putting up here that you're looking at about all this land use and different things, you've got to have the other stakeholders on board.
So we need to find the function out first. What do we want them to do? What's the function of this group?
To me, the farming community has a big stake in our community, and you can't have it urban driven. It's got you've got to have the rural there as well, but I think the whole thing needs a big overhaul. And yeah,
Have you got a response that?
I would, and I totally agree. And so we're wanting to enable that flexibility through this, so that can be determined here within Ashburton. If there's a local leadership group, do they want it to be like a collaborative process, like through your biodiversity strategy? And I've heard that talked about a lot, about the value of that and the value of the process. So how do you mimic that within this group? We don't want to. It should be determined at place here within Ashburton about what that community engagement looks like, and back to kind of Mayor Brown's point around, and that might change over time depending on what you're focusing on. If you're focusing on a particular kind of a freshwater issue, it might look different for a biodiversity issue, or it might look very similar. But we want that flexibility and that discretion to be made at place.
Because biodiversity and the water, they work hand in hand, very much so, right through the two systems. So I think it needs to be somehow combined and everyone talking.
Yeah, we did our own review of the zone committee as well, so I'll just hand over to Hamish for...
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thanks, Cameron. I just thought it might be a good opportunity just before we continue to ask questions to reflect a bit of the history that wasn't in your quick overview, which was that we had raised the same sort of concerns around, does the zone committee, is it structured as a fit for purpose has it got, the work programs that are adding value and impact to our community. And so we conducted our own little review first, and then as that started to come in, the Mayoral Forum and ECan wanted them to do an overall review, which was great because then we're all seeing the same need. But I wondered whether, Tony, you're in any position to briefly reflect on not the process but the outcomes of our own review, because I think that's a little piece of the Ashburton specific part, because you've referred to what we need here might not be the same as somewhere else. The Mayor's accurately, in my memory, reflected that the Mayoral Forum, while it adopted this for conversations, made a really clear point that this particular model, this particular structure around the local leadership group may not be the same in all parts of the region. So all that kind of conversation or commentary is leading to what we need here needs to be fit for purpose here, and other places will do what they need to do to suit those places. So, I've gone round in circles a little bit, but Tony, is it fresh in your mind where our own little review got to that fed into the and got overtaken, if you like, by the wider review?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, at a high level, it pretty much is similar to what the regional view has been. I mean, certainly locally here, our zone committee, in that early phase, gosh, they got some amazing work done and some incredible progress made, and some really cool examples of that work. Over time, as the function of the zone committee has changed, as Cam alluded to through his work, we certainly saw that reflected here in our zone committee's work as well, and they almost had less ability to make the change that they wanted to do, not because of a lack of effort, but because that part of the role had changed on them. There was also an element that came through in the research around community representativeness and making sure that we had the balance right sitting on the committee, and that had changed over time, and that was sort of something that was now kind of lingering, is actually, have we got all the right voices around the table to have the conversations that we need to have? But that's also, I guess, inextricably kind of linked into the role and the function. So they all do go hand in hand together. I mean, the ability to have the community voices represented around the table will always remain strong here, and I don't think that will change anytime soon. But there are ways in which that can be managed and mitigated under a new approach, if that's where we end up.
Thanks, Tony, for that. We've got questions now. Shall we go to Richard?
I'm interested to see that the key partners in the Canterbury Regional Water Management Strategy are territorial authorities, Ngāi Tahu, Environment Canterbury, and community and organisation was interested in water. And that was the basis that the zonal committees were set up. And I understand, reading through some of these reviews that came through, there was a comment that some of the parties in that felt that they were getting more respect or more results by skipping straight past that and going straight to Chewham Street. And that's been displayed in our zonal committee, where we had 3 vacant seats with Runanga, which we wanted to be there but weren't there. And I felt it from those reports, it felt that they didn't need to be there because they had a better avenue into ECan than with our zonal committee. So the new structure, is that going to respect our local community, or is it going to be, because it can divorce itself a wee bit from it through the circles? And I know a core group makes the decision, and the others they can ask in if they want, they feel like it. And it's much easier not to ask them into the tent because you don't have to listen to them. So I'm just concerned that going forward, that's going to be the process that we have. If you understand what I'm getting at, just, our zone committee was working well, but some of the people left the tent and decided there was a better place to be. And that's what's undermined it, I feel. And so I'm just concerned that the new process is the same logic. Don't need to talk to local ones because you've got another place you can be easier.
I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for these local leadership groups to, or the proposed local leadership groups, to demonstrate to the community what that connection looks like. Because Chewham Street doesn't want to determine what that connection should look like. And so we don't want to discount any of the various options that these groups could connect to the community. I think, back to the Kaikoura example, I'm pretty sure every time I talk to Mayor Mackle up there, he says, please don't change the zone committee. So okay, great. You want community representatives. This process is flexible enough to allow that. And so they might have something that looks very similar to a zone committee. looks by all means a zone committee. However, we haven't heard that feedback across all territorial authorities that they want it to look exactly like the zone committee. So this is part of the struggle for us. We're trying to determine how do we kind of enable that flexibility at place, but have some regional consistency. So the regional consistency is like, well, can we have like the three and then kind of the three members and then grow on that membership to determine what they want at place. So if Ashburton wants to determine through that local leadership group that having 4 community members is highly valuable, go for it. However, that might not be seen, the same viewpoint as down south, and so that's what we're trying to kind of work for, but just noting there's a high level of flexibility and kind of local discretion to determine what that looks like at place.
Yeah, I think the slight disconnect is that probably here in Ashburton, we're not looking for the local leadership group as currently described to define how the community is involved. We see the community as part of the local leadership group, and that's baked in. And then other interests will be involved depending on the purpose and the work of the group. So that's I think that was where we were trying to sort of get to is there's a fourth leg to the stool that's in the circle and is an intimate part of whatever the future of the zone committee is, as opposed to saying that the three-legged stool decides what that will be or recommends what that would be, that it's done for us at the start. And what we, I think, took away from the mayoral forum is that while the core leadership group concept had the mayoral forum's support, only in place was that true if everyone wanted that, i.e. this one size doesn't fit all can still mean that the core leadership group in Ashburton is different to that because that's what's important to us. So I think that's the core leadership group as defined here for us probably hasn't quite got the prominent role and acceptance that it might have elsewhere in the region.
Tony? Thanks.
When you talk about climate change or severe droughts, I sort of think water storage. And when I've read the stuff that we've been sent, there's no talk about water storage. So should that be a priority, and should that be part of the scope, that water storage becomes a priority moving forward?
Absolutely, if that's what the local leadership group determines is one of the key priorities for driving towards the CWS targets and principles, that's at the discretion of that local group.
Yeah, good point you raised there, Tony. Water storage is important. If you store all this water, what are you going to use it for? And the current rules, you can't change land use. So you've stored all this water for no purpose. Those things need to be thought all the way through. Yeah.
And that's,
That's
intricacy of the planning framework, which is creating headaches all over the place.
Yeah. Russell.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think some of what we may need is some key focus groups here, because very much I feel our water zone committee's been south of the Ashburton River, and very much around the Hines-Hekio area. A big core focus there, and there's other areas our district I think need some focus put on them. But we need to find those locals in that community who are prepared to join these focus groups. I also agree, I think you're better to do less things very well than a lot of things half-heartedly, if you like, just because of resource availability. So, but what those things are, I agree with Neil. I think the group needs to have a key purpose, key objectives, and then once you have those, you think, right, to achieve this, we need these sorts of people, and go from that angle. But I think Ashburton's been very focused in one area with its water zone committee, and I think there's issues in other parts of our county that could also benefit.
Liz, could you?
Thank you, and that probably leads me on to my question about catchment groups, and you mentioned that before, but we've got some really strong catchment groups in our district and how they can be incorporated in and what their future is going forward and how that will work in the leadership group, because I think that's key going forward as well.
I'll just go back to one of the slides you had there, Cameron. It's the purpose of the proposed local leadership groups. And if you went back a bit, that one. The group's core purpose would be to connect councils in mana whenua to support collaborative and strategic freshwater management on key priorities. I'm just wondering, what does that actually mean?
So, and it's a good question, and this is one of the hardest things when you're trying to capture a purpose statement within about 20 words. So, what we're getting at there is strategic freshwater management on key priorities. And so I referred to the targets report before, which will show a lot of good work has happened, but a lot of good work needs to continue to happen. And so this is around what are the key, 3 or 4 issues within a particular area that need to be focused on by those 3 parties to achieve against those CWMS targets. So it's really around kind of prioritising against those key issues. Now, of course, there's not always agreement about what those key issues are, and so there might be disagreement around that. But what can those groups agree to as far as needing further work, a lift in effort, or a change in approach to drive towards CWMS outcomes?
Thank you. Sure.
Just a couple of one question on the Canterbury Policy Forum. Who's the Ashburton District Council rep for that? Because the way you explained it was a...
Mark Lowe is currently the rep on that. It was previously Tony Durham.
And so does that lead, with, this looks like it's going pretty quick and it's going to end up on the desk of the mayoral forum, and our mayor's not on that group, so he's only going to get his input through. I don't know how he gets his input in there through this today, is it? So will you provide, your take, because this is what we're relying on potentially, on the recommendations back to the committee as to what we think here, because I'm concerned that what you listen today, that's our chance, and that's it, and you'll go off into the distance and say, well, Ashburton District Council said this. So how can we refine, because your take on it and our take on it could be slightly different, so will you be providing us with a recommendation what the Ashburton District Council thought, or the Ashburton community, because we would involve our community in that thought pattern, and so the mayor then can be armed with a...
Yeah. Can I just help? Maybe, Cameron? So I think if you focus, or you just recall the last slide in the final piece of the timeline, is that whatever is established in each part of the district, each part of the region, is at a district by district level. And so regardless of the various fora that are going to do the thinking, regardless of Cameron's report, regardless even of the mayoral forum's kind of position, in the end, the leadership group or new version of the zone committee will be established by the Territorial Authority, Ashburton District Council and ECan jointly in establishing that committee. So it cannot be established or re-established without this council being happy with its form and function. So in the end, we've got oceans of protection for the final outcomes here, for us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. When I look on the long-term plan with regards to ECan's responsibilities is setting the regulatory framework, responding to pollution events, and there's a whole bullet point list of that. If you're in the little 3-legged stool, ECan and Runanga and local representatives, how are ECan going to have different rules for different areas, or how are they going to adjust their priorities? Like one thing I'm thinking about, we talked about fish screens last week or a couple of weeks ago, and we were told that that's in the rules that we require fish screens here. And whether that's still required or not, we don't know because that work hasn't yet been undertaken or reviewed. Are there going to be different implementation roles and speed and activities for different localities, if you like?
What I would say is yes, we would hope that if these groups provide clear recommendations around what some priorities should be, we can take that, much as the Territorial Authority could take that and direct some work towards that. I think the rule setting is a different question, because what we do know through rule setting that's been previously, we've got a hellishly complex planning framework, different rules across different districts, that needs to be simplified. And so that's a work program that we're hoping to do through integrated plan. So I'm not sure we'd want to see different rules at different places, but absolutely where there are issues such as fish screens, for example, I don't think that's an Ashburton specific issue. We hear that a lot from
Can I
wherever
just
we go.
elaborate, or do you want to?
Yep, carry on.
Do you want to, shall I elaborate before you, Ange? Is that
No,
okay?
no,
Yeah.
Caroline.
I think we have 10 zone committees at the moment, don't we? And presumably they all are currently that have been reviewed by the mayoral forum. Is that right? 10?
Yeah, we have 10 water zones. We have 9 zone committees because the one in the Hurunui was disestablished in 2021.
We have 9, and presumably each of those districts have different constraints and limitations and requirements. And they're all, when I look at the map, they're all vastly different. And when I hear you speak, we're going to have local input into our activities, and local people are going to have influence. And we heard the mayor talk about water storage and land use consents and all the rest of it. I think we need ECan also to recognise that we may need different expectations based on different, with climate change happening, there'll be different impacts of that on the different areas. So are ECan acknowledging that in any way? That would be, and often a common complaint of ECan is duration of decision making takes a long time. Do you acknowledge that? And if you do acknowledge that, are there going to be changes in the line with regards to that under this new local sort of activity,
Yes, so there's 2 things, and we're kind of getting into parts of the organisation that I know at a high level about, but I think absolutely the decision-making one's a good one, and that's why we've worked hand over fist to get our consent backlog out of the way, because we know consents were as an example of timeframes, were taking too long. We had a backlog that was significant of consents that were just waiting for decisions. We've cleared that backlog now, which is great, but we want to be in a position where decisions don't take that long. Appreciating the variances within Canterbury, absolutely, and you might remember with the regional policy statement where that was being drafted and having kind of freshwater management units that set across and articulating what they are, because we do know they're different, and so quite often one set of rules might make sense in one place but it doesn't in another. So that work is ongoing, noting that there have been kind of hiccups within the planning process, but there's ultimately wider drivers associated with resource management planning as well, and as Mayor Brown pointed to earlier, where the direction from the government comes through with Resource Management Act, etc., and how that might shape future planning regimes is going to be really important too.
Because I bring up the point like a flood, building and maintaining flood and river resilience, well clearly that differs throughout the region.
Thank you. Ange being a member of the zone committee, question or comment?
So probably I just want to support some of the things that Cam said and we've heard today, and it's wearing a zone committee hat but also being so involved with the development and now the ongoing growth of catchment groups. So I often get asked, is it one or the other? Is it a zone committee or catchment groups doing it? I just wanted to reinforce, when we put our funding application into MPI, very strongly all through it was the fact that the catchment groups were going to build off the work that had been done through the Canterbury Water Management Strategy and the implementation of our zippers. So we didn't start fresh, we were literally building off all of that good work that had happened. I see Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective as an extension of the Zone Committee, and we're kind of like an implementation arm of it, but we're just one arm. So catchment groups are part of the discussion, as are irrigation companies and other key water user groups. So we can't be the group that carries the conversation going forward, but I think we're a significant part of that discussion, if that makes sense. So the context is, since 2009, these discussions are continuing on, and I noticed you talked earlier about some of those key priority areas, and there was a lot of focus in the PC2 area, but a significant number of our catchment groups are on the north side of the Ashburton now, and they're focusing on their key priorities. So just to give that wee update and a bit of context, and also we'll catch up with Cam and talk about what good looks like from our perspective, and we're keen to hear more about what good looks like from their perspective.
Right, thanks, Ange. Rob.
Thank you. Cam, I spoke earlier about some areas, the 9 or 10 areas, some are effective, some aren't. The ones that aren't, how many are those that aren't working effectively with Runanga? So you're saying what's the Kaikoura with Mayor Mackel, who I believe is of a high pedigree. His council works very close with Runanga and obviously get good results. So the ones that aren't, have they got a close bond?
Yeah, there's a spectrum, and you've talked about whereas in Kaikoura, Huranui, the zone committee is disestablished some time ago for a number of reasons. But obviously, that connection has not been strengthened with Runanga via the zone committee, and so I think they felt that. I think down south there's been kind of wavering. I can't say a number because they'll have different kind of relationships. Some down south don't have, or have had times where they don't have Runanga representatives attend either. But it does come in kind of ebbs and flows. But there's not that kind of a certain number where we have they work well because they have Runanga, or they work well because they don't. It is a real spectrum.
It's just a comment Richard made before, like the local representatives here aren't showing. So there's obviously a breakdown.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think a way forward is for Ashburton wants to develop Ashburton's zone committee if we want to retain it. So Ashburton needs to develop their function and purpose, and we can probably do that with the assistance of the chief executive and some of his staff and some members of the community. What does Ashburton want for their zone committee, and we can feed that back. We come up with our Ashburton unique or zone committee and functions and purpose, and we can feed that back in. So we'd be able to do that with some support from staff here, Hamish?
Yes, and we would invite ECan to be part of that as a collaborative process to define what great looks like here, and
iwi as well.
Yeah, indeed. And that might reset the dial for us, and then I'm quite convinced that inside the framework and the conversations that the Mayoral Forum has had, that what the solution is here will stick, because just repeat the Mayoral Forum was absolutely clear, one size doesn't fit all, and we're already seeing that in the conversation just held. Kaikoura doesn't want to change theirs, Huranui hasn't even got one. So there we are, there's not one size that fits all already, and this is an extenuation of that and a time for a refresh to have it fit for purpose for us. So yeah, we're committed to guiding that, facilitating that work.
Good, that's good. And Cameron, you had a page there with some question marks, scale, scope, mandate and structure. Did you want direction on that? There's question marks there, that one.
If you've got direction, that'd be great. I'll just kind of point to Councillor Wilson's remark earlier. That work we'd really appreciate their work and that conversation, because we'll absolutely be feeding back what we've heard, but particularly, and I think I've heard from all of you around the four-legged stool, and making sure that kind of feedback is heard loud and clear, both within that working group, but also the Mayoral Forum, so we can kind of work through how that might look.
Yeah, I think the answer to the first one is the district boundaries, zones, etc. I think we're happy with our zone here, but same as Ashburton District Council between the two rivers, Rangataata and Rakaua. And should groups focus on freshwater management or also land use, biodiversity, biosecurity and natural hazards? And I think biosecurity and natural hazards would be a new thing. So I think most of it, yes, we'll have a think about the other two. Yeah. Mandate and structure, should they remain joint committees of councils based on voluntary partnership? We could work on that with that group that we have, see what we would like there. And operation, how should groups set wider membership meeting frequency? I think that'll be part of our plan that we are developing, our for our zone, yeah. So we can answer those questions for you. I think one definite one is we're happy with the district as it is. Russell, you better go on. Yep.
Thank you. One of the slides there, you talked about the group having an advocacy role almost, coming to council and saying this is like we'd see done. There's frustration around that, and I'll use Carter's Creek as an example. That the area's been advocating for something to happen with Carter's Creek for a very long time, and yet it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And that creates frustration, and people then go, why do I bother? How do we overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, the committees at the moment, the joint committee of ECan and ADC, and they recommend to us and to Environment Canterbury, those recommendations need to be taken with a bit of mana. It's come from the people of the district, so they need to be listened to. I think they used to. I'm not sure if they have been of late. Yeah. It's all good. Anything further, councillors? Last words, Cameron?
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. It's been a really good conversation. We'll absolutely take this feedback, and we'll kind of be informing the working group. But I really look forward to connecting with Tony or whoever it might be around unpacking that question.
Yeah, we need to do that sooner rather than later because you'll need to know by May, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we've got 2 months basically. Yeah. I think mayoral form's end of May, but you've got a report to write as well, I suppose.
Yeah. It's a busy time, but that's a good conversation to be having because it's all constructive.
Great,
Yeah.
got a couple of months. Thank you very much. So thank you for your contribution, and we'll close the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.